What if I told you that the greatest emotional dangers in your life didn't come with warnings? That the bonds that hurt you the most were precisely those that seemed the most welcoming? The human mind is ingenious, but also vulnerable, especially when affection enters the scene. There's a curious paradox in behavior. The safer a relationship seems, the harder it is to realize it's disintegrating us from within. And the scariest part isn't what the other person does, but what they reveal in us. Sometimes, the presence of someone unhealthy serves as a perfect mirror for the part of us we haven't resolved. That changes everything. The problem isn't just him or her, it's what our soul still allows, accepts, repeats. Why do we attract certain patterns? Why are we drawn to the same types of manipulation disguised as care? Throughout this video you'll discover dangerous profiles that inhabit human relationships, not so you'll live in constant alertness but so you'll wake up. Each character described here is also a symbol. They represent not only real people, but inner parts that haven't yet been integrated. There's a subtle cruelty hidden in lukewarm hugs and in smiles that don't reach the eyes. Danger often doesn't arrive with screams or threats, but with enticing invitations, advice wrapped in affection, and a constant presence that becomes too comfortable. When distress comes disguised as affection, instinct gets confused. And in that confusion, unquestioned bonds grow stronger, ties that squeeze, not on the outside but from within. It's easy to spot a blatant attack, an obvious enemy. What's hard is recognizing the threat hidden in exaggerated kindness, in care that suffocates, in help that silently demands emotional debt. Some people manipulate without ever raising their voice, simply by offering a shoulder and presence while slowly draining your autonomy. The lack of confrontation makes everything more dangerous, because it disarms your defenses before they're even activated. Psychologist Eric Fromm said that mature love is that which preserves the other's freedom. But many of our affections are laden with hidden demands. The false friend, the possessive partner, the controlling family member, they all operate under the same logic, offering the appearance of protection while silently installing a control mechanism. You stop being you and begin adjusting to the emotional mold imposed by the other. That's why the greatest risk lies in relationships that never challenge you to grow, that avoid conflict at the cost of your truth. The smile that doesn't respect your boundaries can be more dangerous than direct criticism. It's not the declared enemy who destroys the most, it's the one who comes smiling and little by little, shuts down your intuition. There's a kind of emotional blindness that doesn't protect us, it condemns us. Jung warned about this. The danger isn't just in what the other does, but in what we fail to see in them. The collective unconscious, this psychic inheritance we all carry, is populated by archetypes. Figures like the traitor, the seducer, the manipulator. They all live within us, and because of that, we either strongly recognize or reject them when they appear externally. These archetypal figures don't show up randomly. They serve a role, to awaken what is hidden in us, what hasn't yet been integrated. When we fail to see the jealousy behind protection or the inflated ego behind generosity, we give too much power to those around us. And when we give power unconsciously, we open space to be guided by forces we don't understand. That's how we become easy targets. People who don't recognize their own limits tend to attract those who feed off them. The danger lies precisely in the lack of discernment. When we think someone is too good to be true, we're usually right. What we lack is courage to look deeper, to perceive the energy behind the gestures, not just the gestures themselves. Jung's wisdom reminds us, if we don't make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our lives and we'll call it fate. That's why seeing the other is not just an exercise in empathy, it's an act of emotional survival. Those who don't recognize the archetype the other represents end up living a story they didn't write, but somehow always knew by heart. There's a kind of presence that seems magical at first glance. A silent magnetism, wrapped in charisma, intelligence, and an almost hypnotic glow. The seducer, unaware of their own emptiness, is a master of this art. They don't lie directly, they omit themselves. They enchant with beautiful words, intense stories, gazes that seem to pierce the soul. And that's exactly where the danger lies. In what they make you feel, not in who they really are. This type of person seeks to complete themselves through the other. That's why they project fascination but carry absence. They attract strongly but don't sustain depth. Over time you realize you're giving more than you're receiving. That your conversations are intense but circular. That there's a kind of subtle exhaustion after each encounter, a weariness that doesn't come from too much presence, but from the constant feeling of being emotionally drained. The empty seducer doesn't do this out of malice, they do it out of need. They believe love is making the other fit into their voids. They constantly seek admiration, applause, to be seen as special. But they never offer themselves fully. And that's where the risk lies. You begin to lose yourself trying to keep the other's glow alive. You begin to mold yourself, silence yourself, adjust. Until you realize you no longer know where the charm ended and the emotional prison began. But the empty seducer only shows artificial lights. They hide the shadows not for protection but out of shame of being seen without the glow. And in this silent game, the one who pays the price is always the one who gives too much, not realizing that the fascination came less from love, and more from the reflection of their own longing. The martyr disguised as the eternal victim is a delicate character to identify, because they don't attack, they suffer. And suffering in itself has a hypnotic power. This person turns every challenge into tragedy, every mistake into injustice, every conflict into yet another sign that the world is against them. They never truly err, but are always at the mercy of what others did or didn't do. And so, they build an emotional trap that looks like empathy, but is manipulation. The danger here lies in the subtlety. The martyr doesn't ask directly but makes you feel responsible. They don't demand but lament with a tone that drags you down. They make you believe you could have done more, said it differently, been more present. Their greatest weapon is guilt. They give it to you like a gift, and when you accept it, you start living to fix something that was never yours to fix. These people masterfully take on the role of the victim. Every conversation circles back to their pain. Every gesture of yours is interpreted as another wound opened. Over time you find yourself avoiding conflict, censoring truths, sacrificing your will, all to avoid hurting someone who already seems so hurt by the world. And in that dynamic the martyr gains control. A veiled control sustained by affection and pity. Jung said that no one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making darkness conscious. And this kind of relationship teaches us exactly that caring for others can't mean abandoning ourselves. The martyr doesn't want healing, they want company for their drama. And as long as you stay on their stage, you'll never fully live your own story. The spiritualized narcissist is a fascinating and dangerously convincing figure. They dress in humility but are driven by vanity. They talk about self-knowledge, light, evolution, but can't handle being contradicted, questioned, or faced with their own inconsistencies. Their speech is elevated but their practice is controlling. They use the language of spirituality to shield the ego, not expand it. They're the kind of person who turns any criticism into negative energy, and any disagreement into proof that you're not centered. They don't impose with aggression but with superiority. Instead of opening space for true exchange, they create an environment where only they seem to have the right answer because they know more, vibrate higher, are more conscious. But deep down there's someone afraid of truly looking within. The manipulation here is subtle, wrapped in beautiful phrases and supposedly wise advice. They teach you how to be better but never apply the same lessons to themselves. You begin to feel small next to so much clarity, and that feeling of inferiority becomes an effective form of emotional submission. The spiritualized narcissist doesn't want to learn from you. They want you to admire them. And if possible to feel eternally indebted for what they awakened in you. As Socrates warned, know thyself, is a call to humility, not arrogance. The true spiritual path requires courage to face one's own shadow, something the narcissist avoids at all costs. They hide behind lights, mantras and speeches, but all it takes is an honest mirror for their mask to start cracking. And then you realize, it wasn't wisdom, it was vanity dressed as a guru. Envy is a silent emotion, and precisely because of that, it's dangerous. When it comes from someone who calls themselves a friend, it doesn't bite, it whispers. The envious person disguised as a loyal friend is the one who shows up as present, supportive, affectionate, until you begin to bloom. That's when they withdraw, change their tone, or exaggerate their enthusiasm in an artificial way. Deep down, your achievements make them uncomfortable. Your light shines on parts of them they refuse to develop. This kind of person will never attack you directly. Instead, they'll plant small seeds of doubt. They'll say you're moving too fast, that maybe you're being arrogant, that it's better to keep your feet on the ground. All with a concerned smile. But that concern isn't about you, it's about them. Seeing you grow forces them to look at where they're stuck, and that hurts more than they're willing to admit. The manipulation is emotional and gradual. They position themselves as someone who truly knows you, and therefore feel authorized to pull your brakes whenever your brightness threatens to step out of their comfort zone. It may seem like prudence, care, sincere friendship. But it's a disguised attempt to keep you within a size that makes them feel safe. Small enough not to threaten them, but useful enough so they don't lose you. Spinoza said that envy is hatred of another's good. But when that hatred comes dressed as affection, it corrodes without being noticed. Beware of those who cheer quietly, of those who applaud without soul. Because sometimes what looks like friendship is just a broken mirror. It doesn't reflect who you are, only who the other wishes you weren't. The saboteur disguised as a realist advisor rarely raises their voice. They are calm, rational, serene. Their weapon is logic, but a logic full of fear, projected from their own limitations. Every time you share a dream, they respond with a great idea, but, and what follows that but is always a cold shower, risks, difficulties, possible failures. It's as if enthusiasm were recklessness and dreaming, a threat to stability. This type of advisor doesn't act out of malice, but out of projection. They advise you not to go because they themselves never did. They call you idealistic because they gave up on idealizing. They wear the cloak of prudence, but deep down fear your flight, because your movement confronts their own stagnation. And to maintain the appearance of a sensible friend, they cover their doubts with technical, always very convincing arguments. Over time, your ideas start to come with built-in brakes. You begin to self-censor, to minimize your own vision, to recalculate before even dreaming. This saboteur is effective because they plant fear as if planting care. They never say don't do it, but always end with a think twice. And that thinking twice becomes a mental prison disguised as maturity. The invisible controller doesn't yell, impose, or demand. They manipulate in silence, with gentle gestures, calculated pauses, and strategic absences. Their greatest power lies in what they withhold: affection, presence, recognition. They lead without seeming to, and that's why they're so hard to spot. When you realize it, you're already adjusting your actions so as not to lose their validation. Not because they asked, but because they suggested it through the unspoken. This kind of person creates a dense psychological atmosphere, where you feel you constantly need to try to keep the peace. A simple change in tone or an unanswered message is enough to put you on edge. Their silence becomes a command. Their distance, punishment. And when they finally offer approval, it comes like a rare reward, something you have to earn. This creates a subtle and deeply draining emotional dependency. Passive control is effective because it's based on uncertainty. You never know exactly what you did wrong, but you always feel indebted. You act to avoid discomfort, not to create real connection. It's like walking on emotional quicksand. The more you try to please, the more you sink. And the controller from the outside watches calmly. Not to help, but to keep the game going. The philosopher Lao Tzu said, "He who controls others is strong, but he who controls himself is powerful." The invisible controller, however, tries to control others out of fear of facing their own fragility. They don't seek true connection but stability through controlling others. And the greatest act of freedom you can practice in front of them is to leave the game. Break the cycle. Choose clarity over doubt. There's something deeply revealing about difficult relationships. They don't just affect us, they expose us. Each of these dangerous figures activates unresolved parts within us. Old insecurities, unrecognized needs, repressed desires. They are triggers disguised as people. Jung called this shadow projection, the mechanism by which everything we reject in ourselves begins to disturb us in others. That's why it's no coincidence when we repeatedly fall into the same types of bonds. It's symbolic repetition. Something in us is trying to be seen, to be healed. The shadow isn't evil, it's part of the whole. And every time someone knocks us off balance, it's a sign that something inside is still misaligned. These figures only have power because they find resonance. The manipulator only controls us if there's a part that fears owning its power. The envious one only gets to us if there's something in us that still doubts our own light. That's why the path of self-knowledge requires clarity in relationships. Identifying these profiles around us is more than an act of protection. It's a mirror. The other becomes a signal, not of who they are, but of where we stand emotionally. The problem is never just the presence of the other. It's the absence of ourselves in certain areas of life. The absence of awareness. As Jung said, what we deny in ourselves appears in our life as fate. And as long as we don't honestly look at the discomfort these people cause us, we'll remain trapped in cycles that repeat under new faces. Seeing the other clearly is an act of compassion, but understanding what they reveal in us is an act of true freedom. The real turning point is not identifying the other, but realizing what they trigger in you. Avoiding toxic people may offer momentary relief, but it's not healing, it's postponement. Because true transformation happens when you understand why that person affects you so much, why certain words hurt, why certain actions paralyze you. The question is not just why do they do this, but why does this still get to me? Avoiding the other is like sweeping dust under the rug. Sooner or later it returns with another face, another name, another context. What truly protects us is not distance but clarity. When you know yourself, when you understand your wounds, your voids, and your patterns, you don't become cold, you become free. Free to relate without being consumed. Free to say no without guilt. Free to see from the start what you used to only recognize at the end. Self-knowledge, in that sense, is the only shield that doesn't imprison, it sets you free. It's not about living in suspicion but in awareness. The more you shed light on what's unresolved within you, the less room there is for draining, constrictive, or diminishing relationships. Healing doesn't come from isolation but from emotional maturity. And that maturity is born from confronting your own shadow. Nietzsche said that he who fights monsters should be careful not to become one. But I'd go further. They should look courageously at the inner monsters that others only awaken. Because in the end, the most dangerous person you can meet is the part of you that insists on going unseen. And that's precisely the one that most needs your love, your clarity, and your transformation. In the end, it's not just about identifying dangerous people. It's about recognizing the parts of us that still allow them to stay. Each toxic behavior we tolerate points to a lack of awareness, not about the other but about who we are in front of them. True power is born when you can look at someone who once dominated you and simply not be shaken. That's the turning point, when clarity wins over neediness and understanding replaces doubt. Maybe you'll realize after this video that the most urgent thing isn't cutting external ties, but healing the internal ones. That real freedom doesn't come from distancing but from integration. That self-knowledge isn't a luxury, it's emotional protection, existential clarity, effective maturity. So think, who still dominates you from within even if they've already left your life outwardly? What pattern do you keep repeating because you haven't yet had the courage to face yourself truthfully? Don't run from the answer, it's your next step. If this video moved you, share in the comments what touched you most. And if you want to continue this journey of self-discovery, there's more content on the screen that may open new doors within you. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and remember, when you change your perspective, everything changes, including who you attract.